Naughty Dog, Defiant Puppy. What is it with you guys creating some of the greatest IPs in the spectrum of gaming and then dropping them off of a virtual cliff to their inevitable deaths? Crash Bandicoot might have come out of his disgusting slump bigger and better than ever thanks to a surprising amount of clever decisions made by Activision of all people, but where my heart really lies in this hate-filled questionnaire is Jak and Daxter. Sure, make 3 of the greatest platforming, collect-a-thon, Grand Theft Auto cousin, whatever the hell you want to call them, that not only changed the 6th generation, but also video games as a whole, and then kick the series to the curb without a second thought. I know, I sound incredibly immature right now, and yeah, Naughty Dog followed up the Jak trilogy with its very own spin-off in the form of a racing game. I'll probably get to that at some point, but when you start to read between the lines, you begin to notice something a little bit fishy. It's the exact same thing they pulled with Crash Bandicoot, only this time they had absolutely no reason to outsource the series to other mediocre developers. Much like Insomniac with Spyro, Naughty Dog had to boldly move on, and by that I mean create a successor in the form of a brand new game, therefore evolving what they had previously set in place. Only, instead of milking their new series for everything it was worth, like another company that rhymes with the word schmimschmomniac, they decided to take it out back and tell it about the rabbits. But that wasn't enough. Oh, no. A mercy kill wouldn't cut it. The series still had what appeared to be a fleeting heartbeat, so they did the most incorrigible thing any company ever could. They gave perhaps the greatest series on the PlayStation 2 to a bunch of C-listers. I can't really blame Naughty Dog though. As much of a travesty as this is, it wasn't the first time something related to Jak was placed in the care of someone else. In fact, they'd previously collaborated with a little-known studio by the name of Ready at Dawn to produce the series' first spin-off game, Daxter. Albeit harmless, the problem here was simplicity. Ready at Dawn played things a little too safe, which resulted in lots of people forgetting about the game as time went on. I didn't though. Case in point, Naughty Dog had a nasty habit of making something really good and then allowing it to just devolve into the video game equivalent of mush. There's no better example of this than Jak and Daxter: The Lost Frontier. This game boggled me when it came out. For starters, I had no idea it even existed. In fact, it's thanks only to my older brother, who I'm slowly but surely realizing did a lot of things to make my childhood harder than it needed to be, told me about it. And we had a conversation that went a lot like this. Hey, Caleb, did you hear about the new Jak and Daxter game? It's called Jak and Daxter: The Lost Frontier. No, I didn't. Oh, well, I read all about it in Game Informer. Looks, kinda looks weird, you know? Yeah. Hey, you're really fat. So yes, this game right here, I mean, what the hell was going on at Naughty Dog that caused them to make a blunder of such colossal proportions? God help them if it's something they still struggle with, or else we're gonna be seeing 2 more mainline Last of Us games, a kart racer, and then a mobile game made by some company in India. I honestly went into this game with good expectations and the best attitude I possibly could, and I know, I've done the whole good expectations thing before, but let me be real with you. This game looks a hell of a lot better when you're not the one playing it. And no, I'm not saying it looks better because you can actually take everything in. This isn't Cuphead. But you know what, let's just start things. This is Jak and Daxter: The Lost Frontier, also known as How Naughty Dog Handles Digital Abortion. Oh, also, when I googled high-impact games, this popped up in the search bar. Oh god, this can't be good. What the hell is this? Yep, that was the worst thing I've ever seen. Actually, scratch that. It gets second place to none other than this title screen. I get it, it might be a little bit nitpicky, and yeah, I'm well aware that before this was ported to the PS2, it was a PSP exclusive. But is this really the best that High Impact could come up with? Jak 1 through 3's title screens weren't exactly the best, but what they did have was symbolism, and that's what made them memorable. The first game sees the camera floating around Sandover Village, signifying that this was going to be a sprawling, wide-open adventure. The second game has the camera placed among neon lights with an obvious cityscape, showing that this game was going to be a colder, more mature experience. And the third sits in a dry desert that's currently experiencing a sandstorm, which really gets across the feeling of desperation and isolation in such a grand area. And if you really think about it, the end, as the third game was the formal curtain call to the trilogy. Lost Frontier's got a JPEG. It symbolizes how low quality the experience is. The game, begins with Jak, Daxter, and Kira flying around trying to find out just why the world is experiencing an eco shortage. Before long, they're attacked by sky pirates right out of Treasure Planet, and as Jak goes to transform into his alter ego, like that I just came up with it, Kira says this.
Oh, Jak! Eco is too unstable!
Now you may be wondering, why? Well, I'll tell you why. Lazy writing. Following the attack, their Hellcat is badly damaged, which causes them to crash and allows you to get your first taste of gameplay. At a glance, everything checks out. Jak can still punch, spin, uppercut, and dive bomb, but for some reason has lost the ability to roll and duck, meaning no more high jumps or rolling jumps. Okay, that's a little weird and honestly takes a while to get used to, but how's everything else here? Well, platforming itself feels a little bit stiff. I've talked before about how Jak always controlled in a bit of a stiff manner, pretty much needing you to commit to anything you were planning on pulling off. This, however, takes it to a whole new level, as coupled with this gorgeous camera view courtesy of the PSP, an unbelievable amount of jumps are bordering on leap of faith territory. It wouldn't be that big of a deal if Jak controlled like, say, Hat Kid, being able to correct any mistakes before it's too late, but no, Jak's like a huge boulder. Once he gets moving, it's an event in and of itself to stop him. Guns return, though this time in the form of a staff that Jak wields, which allows him to make use of the various pre-existing mods, such as the Scattergun, Blaster, Vulcan Fury, and... Lobber? For whatever reason, there's no Peacemaker to be found here, despite how much of an awesome addition it was previously. However, the Lobber itself is a pretty handy weapon and acts a lot like the Plasmite RPG add-on for the Scattergun in Jak 3. In fact, if you've played Jak 3, you've already played The Lost Frontier, as this is, yet again, another case of the Wrath of Cortex syndrome. We've all seen it before, taking a game, adding next to nothing, and releasing it as a new edition. It happened to Spyro, so it only makes sense that Jak and Daxter were up next. In this game's defense though, can't believe I'm actually saying that, it isn't as cut and dry as the other two bastardizations. While the core concepts and gameplay are nearly identical to that of Jak 3, High Impact did implement a few new additions, but they aren't really anything to get excited over. For starters, Jak retains a few of his light eco abilities, which is kinda funny since I thought the eco was so unstable he couldn't use his dark powers, but whatever. He can still do things like slow down time and create a protective shield, but he's also now capable of performing yellow eco rocket jumps, lobbing explosive red eco energy, and pulling green eco crystals out of the ground to platform on them. If anything, this inclusion is at least a teensy bit neat, seeing as in a way it goes back to the series' roots, having Jak command the different colors of eco. For some reason though, the developers saw fit to shoehorn in unwelcomed QTEs. I suppose it's because God of War Chains of Olympus had just come out the year prior. Yeah, these are no good, and all they do is act as barriers between sections of gameplay, and I honestly can't imagine trying to do any of these on the PSP. Along with new additions come copious amounts of upgrades, whether in regards to weapons, eco, or your ship. Yes, Jak 2 had its zoomers, Jak 3 had its buggies, and The Lost Frontier has planes, and it's a shame because the aerial combat in this game is considerably horrible. The worst part is, half of the game is dedicated to it. Whereas in previous titles, vehicles were mostly used for getting around and on a few odd occasions were given missions, here they're the secondary focus of the game. It's just so clunky. No matter what maneuvers you pull off, whether it be U-turns, somersaults, or barrel rolls, you're gonna find yourself getting pounded by ceaseless enemy fire. And even when that's not an issue at hand, the inclusion just feels so forced and adds nothing to the gameplay. It really doesn't help that some of the most frustrating missions in the game are reserved for this mode. One of them has you protecting a ship from these cannons, and every time you destroy them, the barracks launch these missiles, and it's just such a strenuous process the first time around that by the time you realize you need to repeat it 2 times over, you'd rather spend your time checking the slums. But by far, the biggest slap in the face here, no, more like kick to the nads with a steel-toed boot, is that someone thought, hey, let's have it so Daxter becomes an eco-monster and the player has to solve stupid puzzles and kill copy and paste enemies. Like, if there's one thing here that really honks my dodongo, it's all of this. Fool me once, I hope you go to Detroit and get shot, because if I'm not mistaken, the whole reason Jak can't transform has something to do with Eco being unstable, but Daxter can just turn into a werehog over here because consistency was the last thing on the minds of the people that made this game. And it's so repetitive, it's always run here, flip that, spin this. There's seriously no flow, it's all just the same thing over and over again. And when Jak inevitably finds out, he just comments on Daxter's weight because...
Hey Dax, putting on some pounds.
That's funny. Where's the creativity? Give me something I want to see that would actually shake things up and maybe raise the stakes. I know I joked about Dark Jak being ripped off in Sonic Unleashed, but it's all come full circle. The Lost Frontier is ripping off Sonic the Werehog now. It really is safe to say that this is the least appealing Jak game, in more ways than one, especially in its presentation. I'm well aware that this was originally a portable title, but does that really mean it had to be so ugly? Allow me to pull from Daxter here. This is what a usual foresty level looks like in that game. Bright, vibrant, full of life, as a biologically thriving location such as a forest should appear. Notice how it looks natural as it's sprawling with green grass and confined in the bounds of brown hills? Well, this is what a forest looks like in Jak and Daxter: The Lost Frontier. It doesn't matter if it's the grass, rocks, or anything else. The presentation in this game is muddy and unappealing to look at, and that's just in the nature settings. Now, are you prepared for the biggest shocker here? Because this is a good one. Daxter came out over 3 years before The Lost Frontier. If that isn't the telltale example of a capable developer versus an incompetent one, I don't know what is. And for whatever reason, the characters have been slightly redesigned. Jak no longer sports his goatee, and if I'm being honest, isn't even Jak anymore. You could replace him with a cardboard cutout and would probably get better results. Kira now looks like a human version of Coco Bandicoot from Mind Over Mutant, and Daxter is the only recognizable one of the bunch. Strangely enough, none of the other characters from the previous games are present here, meaning that I can't ridicule how they look, and that Samos probably died from that severe case of anemia, or what the hell? This is also the first game in the series to opt for CG cutscenes rather than having them done on engine, which doesn't really surprise me on account of how bad the game looks. It is pretty jarring though, seeing the presentation go from this to this, which, might I add, is 10 times as disturbing. I also get the feeling that the game is struggling to just run. To be fair, the frame rate is a lot better than most PSP games, and let's be honest, some PS2 games. But certain things like loading levels brings the game to a sudden stop as it flatlines and then slowly comes back to life. And yes, I said loading levels. See, Jak 1 through 3 are remembered for many achievements in the realm of open-world 3D platformers, one of them being creating a seamless world devoid of any loading screens. Now, let's be honest, these games have loading screens in them. Quite a bit, actually. In fact, the games load as you play them. The thing is, Naughty Dog took special precautions that allowed the game to do so without impeding on the fun of the player. Whether it was forcing the camera into a certain position, completely masking the loading process with a huge elevator, or simply hiding it behind a mechanical door. There is absolutely no effort to hide the loading screens here, not only because the game outright dies when it has to load something, but also because the control is taken out of the hands of the player. Certain screens, such as launch sequences for example, see Jak hop in a plane and just sit there for a bit before taking off. I honestly hope he crashes. So that's Jak and Daxter: The Lost Frontier. It pretty much encompasses what we've seen from just about every other game developed in a series after its initial creator moves on. Oh, and before I forget to mention, it's important to note that Josh Mansell did not return to compose the soundtrack, meaning it's filled to the brim with generic action movie type tracks. My, how the once great have become mediocre. I'd like to get all sappy and heartfelt, really expressing deep down why the game is a disappointment and is a disservice to the other Jak games, but at this point, I don't even care anymore. You know a game is bad when in its case is an advertisement for the console Naughty Dog's new projects are on. Also, speaking of Naughty Dog, they themselves have criticized the title, expressing that they were not happy with it being Jak's swan song, and could have done a lot better. And because I know a few of you are curious, if I really had to rank this game, I'd place it between The Wrath of Cortex and Enter the Dragonfly, with the former being the best and the latter the worst. Enjoy your time behind bars, boys. You won't be missed.